UCF, welcome back Scott Frost, who gave them some glory and then went to Nebraska, didn't work out. Back with UCF, and Marc Daniels, voice of UCF Athletics. You can see him on the screen. Good to see you, my man.
Good to see you guys. Happy holidays.
You too. When the UCF coaching change with Malzahn occurred, did you have Scott Frost on your radar pretty quickly?
I think when the vacancy happened at UCF, I would think any UCF fan probably wonders, well, gee, will they talk to that guy? And I think it was natural to assume that. Now, that still took Athletic Director Terry Mohajir having an open mind, because I think, guys, there's some optics there. Am I going to go talk to, let alone hire the guy that everybody else is trying to tell me about that I'm not connected to? But I think Terry was fair in the process and said, look, Scott deserves a chance to have a conversation. And then his candidacy grew. But if you ask a UCF fan 1 year ago, I don't think they would have told you that they would be in this position. And I'm not quite sure 10 days ago you would have convinced Scott, hey, there'll be an opening and you'll be the head coach.
Mark, I know that there's that, I mentioned earlier in the show, but you can never go home again. What you leave is never what you come back to. And obviously they're in a different conference. Things are different. He had a very rough stretch at Nebraska. What do you think is different, and how will he approach it differently given the different conditions that he returns to at UCF? Because it is a different job than the one he left.
Look, there's some stars that align only because it's UCF. I don't know who would have hired Scott in college football outside of UCF. But there's also no job that Scott was going to leave the Rams, where he really enjoyed his time as an analyst, working with Sean McVay, that staff, creating a path that would have allowed him to maybe grow in the National Football League and not having to deal with all this stuff that we've been talking about beyond X and O's. So I think the only job Scott would have left for was to be the head coach at UCF. In the very brief time that I've seen Scott since he's come back, look, we're all older. He's been through a lot at Nebraska. I think he's still somewhat in shock that this happened so quickly to come back here. I think he also feels like, the circumstance was unique when he left, and ideally he didn't want to leave, and he wants to get it right and knows that it's a different UCF conference, the business of college football. But I think the dots work for a variety of reasons in the sense of his past here. There's a comfort level with some of the people that he worked with are back here. I think there's a fan base that obviously is re-energized, and there's that kind of feel good about what it was. He made it very clear at his press conference. He's made it clear talking to others. This isn't 2017 continuing. This is a different football program, but I do think he feels like he can win here. And I do think he's aligned with an administration that has the same philosophy on how they want to build a roster in the coming years. I think we're all still learning about how do you do it. Some programs may want to portal it with 40, 50 guys every year. I don't think UCF's going to be that in the years moving forward. I think there'll be more of an emphasis on developing players. And I think that's where Scott and Athletic Director Terry Mohajir kind of aligned of like, okay, I need to see that vision of developing guys and not just going into the portal every year.
What did you think of the hire of another favorite there down in Orlando and Mackenzie Milton as the quarterback's coach?
Do you ever turn down the second scoop of ice cream when they offer it to you? Many years later?
Right.
It's also part of this incredible week for UCF. Mackenzie Milton's UCF royalty, and the connection there will last forever. And I said this in my show, talking to people. Imagine what the week was like for him. Mackenzie and Scott obviously have talked all the time, but here you are giving advice or being a sounding board for someone that's thinking, I want this job. I need this job. I can't imagine if I don't get this job. And Mackenzie's having conversation with Scott Frost, which include, and if I get it, you're coming. And Mackenzie clearly wants to come. and he needs Scott to get the job, and then to have it happen. And you may have seen the picture and the video of Scott embracing Mackenzie when he arrived yesterday. Shaquem Griffin was there, and it's kind of throwing it back to 2017 again. But guys, you've been around college football long enough that certain programs need that culture re-energized, that need that thing that kind of makes your fan base feel like, okay, we're all together. And believe me, Terry Mohajir had plenty of options to hire good quality coaches that may have worked. This one has a different feel because of what it means to your football fan base, what it means to sell tickets for your donors, and that stuff matters in the economy of college football these days.
You know, it's a passionate fan base. We just had Jed Drenning on. You know him with West Virginia. That's a very passionate fan base. There's a lot of these in the Big 12 because there's a lot of unique schools. Do you have to have connections with UCF to get UCF?
No, I don't think so, but I do think where UCF's program has been, it helps in this situation. I said this, I'll say it again. Gus Malzahn's a good man. Gus Malzahn's a good coach, and I wish Gus Malzahn nothing but success at Florida State and wherever else he goes. It just didn't work at UCF. And the way the season ended with a fan base that was very frustrated, and you kind of wondered, where are we? And how do we get it going? And this was going to be another massive rebuild for Gus in 2025, that I think the stars align, that somebody that knows a little bit about UCF, that experienced a football high, that understands why UCF is different, to play off of our youth, to play off of a social media approach that's different, a fan base that's different, in a fertile recruiting ground, in a major market that is also different compared to some other programs of the conference. I think those stars align where it makes sense. Now, ultimately, you got to win football games, but I do think in this situation, the UCF connection, and then bringing back some of those players of those teams in 2017 and 18, the back-to-back undefeated seasons, just makes you feel a little bit better. It still comes down to wins. We all know you can win a press conference, you can win an offseason. What's a football season going to be like? And Scott said at his presser, hey, if you think we're going undefeated next year, you got to wake up from that. But I do think he believes that he can win here, and he's going to build it differently than what he did in 2016 and 17. He has to. This is a different league and a much tougher league.
He mentioned in his press conference that sometimes you got to realize what you have is not bad. And I get the lure as a legend that won their last national title as the quarterback in Nebraska in 97. I think everybody anywhere can kind of maybe remember that saying, right? That what you have is not a bad deal, even though there might be something that looks better.
Yeah, and again, you got to understand the circumstances, okay? Again, Scott Frost didn't get fired from UCF.
Right.
He left for an opportunity. I think that's different than coaches that come back if they've been fired before. But guys, put yourself in the same situation. It's going home. It's a father that's not doing well health-wise. It's a state that is begging you to be the savior for something so important to them. It's a legendary coach in Tom Osborne that is also kind of making you feel like you have to do this. And that puts Scott in the position that he was in. I've said this again many times before. No other program was going to get Scott Frost away from UCF at the end of 2017. I'm not telling you he would have stayed there every single year, but it was Nebraska. And just like UCF is the only job he was leaving to come back to, the same thing I think applied. And, it didn't work out for the reasons that people know football-wise and the pressures got there. But Scott didn't want to leave. If Mike Riley won a few more football games, Scott Frost was going to be the UCF football coach in 2018 with a loaded roster that preseason hype probably would have had him inside the top 10, that would have given them a legitimate chance if they run the table to make the college football playoff. And when you build that and all of a sudden you're like, but I have to take this job, I have to go home, that's different than, you got fired or you just left to go to some other place. And that's why I think Scott understood what was unique then, and I think he relishes the opportunity now to come back here and build it back up. And I think he's going to be a different guy, but understands the unique situation.
Mark, this is a fan base also that realizes it's so far unrealized potential, I think, right? With now being in the Big 12, the enormity of it. I think the world barely knows how big UCF is right now. I think that if you're in Florida, you do. You certainly know how big the school has gotten and what the alumni base is and the growth that's happened in the last, just 10, 15 years. But is that something that you feel in the fan base of like, okay, this is the time, let's go, and it's not the time to wait around?
Yeah, it's a good point. Look, there's no argument here. UCF is in the Big 12 because of their undefeated seasons in 2017 and 18, and then the timing fell in place with expansion. And people will cherish those years. Now you've got a chance to build it up in a different league on a national level where now they have to accept you. Where before it was a nice story, but just go to your bowl game and leave us alone. If you can do it at this level, then you have to win over the approval of people. It's tougher because this league is really good. It's a different financial model of college football. But yes, if Scott Frost and UCF can get it going, that's a different level of success than it was before. It's a national acceptance as well. Resources are here. There's still some things that UCF is still growing and playing catch up compared to some of our conference rivals, but there's a lot going for UCF, and it helps that Scott understands that as he tries to build this. And again, he knows, and guys, he learned this when he got to the Big Ten, that you may think a conference adapts to you. You end up adapting to the conference. Now I think Scott understands that. In the American, they were able to out-athlete people, not in the Big 12. Now, I think you can take advantage of things like speed and certain skill players that come from Florida and around the area here, but UCF's got to get tougher, physical, got to find linemen to compete in this league. But if you could do it, yeah, that's a different level of acceptance. No question about it.
How much has he been humbled?
A lot. And just in the brief time that Scott has been back here, I think, again, it's a combination of, wow, I get to go back there. I see familiar faces, and I've got resources that UCF didn't have before. I mean, we're not all the way there yet, but we got more resources than we had when he left here in 2017. But I think he understands. Look, he knows what the national image is. And I think the majority of national college football people are like, yeah, I don't know. Is UCF just tugging at history? He knows that. But it was important, the hiring process, that he convinced the AD and president this wasn't about getting even with Nebraska. This was about, I want to come to UCF. I want to go there because of what we did before and what I think we can do now. And I want to go there because I probably shouldn't have left, but you know why I did. So it's a different Scott Frost. It's the same quick, witty, one-line guy behind the scenes, but I think you're finding a very focused Scott Frost, diligent in putting his staff together, a philosophy about how to build a roster that may be different than what UCF has had. So, yeah, it's a different Scott Frost, but I think it's one that believes he can be successful again at a high level.
Yeah, I hope so. What he did at UCF, and obviously I hoped as a Nebraska lifelong born in Omaha that it might work out. Obviously it did not, and it still hasn't, by the way. They just don't know how to win or haven't been able to win in quite some time. Mark, great to see you. You got to coach, move on, and I know you're doing basketball too, so have a great rest of the year.
Thanks, guys. Happy holidays. Appreciate it.
Marc Daniels, voice of UCF Athletics on the Scott Frost 2.0.